you very much indeed.
Tales of children abandoned by humans and raised by animals may sound like the stuff of myths.
But the British anthropologist Mary-Ann Ochota has been discovering that some of the stories could actually be true. We're going to speak to her here in a moment. But first, let's see her in action in her new documentary series, searching for real cases of what she calls feral children.
Mowgli, from the Jungle Book. The myth of Romulus and Remus. Tarzan. But shockingly, the phenomenon of feral children is not confined to works of fiction. Real-life examples of children raised by animals do exist. I'm anthropologist Mary-Ann Ochota, and feral child cases have always fascinated me. I want to investigate one of the most incredible stories I've ever heard. That of a child known as the Monkey Boy of Uganda, who reportedly survived for years in the forest thanks to the monkeys who adopted him.
Mary-Ann joins us now here. One of the most extraordinary stories. Tell us about him. You found him. What was the deal?
He ran away from home at about the age of 3 or 4. His father was violent, his mother had died, and he was either chased away or ran away into the forest. And he survived there for years, probably with the help of vervet monkeys.
It sounds extraordinary, doesn't it? A human child is not just tolerated by animals, another species, but actually looked after, nurtured to an extent.
Well, that's right. Vervet monkeys are known to accept humans. Zoology researchers, the more time they spend with a troop of vervets, the more they'll be accepted, not so much as part of the family, but more as part of the furniture. So you're kind of tolerated. It's wrong to think that these monkeys would have been giving him bananas and stroking his hair. We're not talking Mowgli.
This is him with the monkeys, actually, we're seeing now, is it?
Yes, that's right. Now, that's a very classic way that John sits now. He squats rather than sits. When he was found, he wasn't able to lie down. Partly because, I think, because of a kind of protective strategy. Lying down is a scary thing to do, as suddenly you're surrounded by humans and you haven't seen them for a long time. But also possibly because he was learning that behaviour and imitating the monkeys that he was with.
So he was found, and now he's obviously no longer with the monkeys. But I mean, how does he then get on with human life out in the real world?
It's incredibly difficult. We're talking massive trauma. When he was found at about the age of 8, he was close to death. He was very, very malnourished. And the villagers who found him saw something that was so extraordinary and so disturbing that they thought that it might be some kind of spirit forest monster. They didn't recognise it as human.
Really.
But someone said, actually, that's a boy, and took it home and fed him, slowly nursed him back to health. But the behavioural scars, the damage of that amount of time on your own in the forest without human input is invariably going to...
Mary-Ann, one of the other cases you study, the dog girl of Ukraine. Tell us about her.
This is the case of Oksana Malaya. She grew up in state care in a Soviet orphanage in what is now Ukraine. And her tale has been told before, and it was suggested that her parents had locked her out of the house and she crawled into the kennel to kind of get protection from the weather. It was freezing cold and she crawled in with the dogs and they accepted her. It became clear when we went out to the Ukraine that this was hoax, this was a lie. And she'd been taken into state care at about the age of 19 months. Now, there's absolutely extraordinary video footage of Oksana on her hands and knees, barking, howling, lapping, water from a bowl. It's like she looks like she's a dog. The nurses at the orphanage found her behaviour so alarming that the nurses who were scared of dogs were scared of her because her behaviour was so thoroughly dog-like. It became clear that she learnt this behaviour in the orphanage, and that's in the heart of a community full of children, in fact full of too many children, and that's probably what sent her towards the dogs, that she wasn't getting the care and emotional nurture that that any human child needs to develop properly.
So it turned out that particular case wasn't quite what you were expecting. The background wasn't quite true. I guess that's the biggest problem, the biggest challenge with these is hoaxes from reality. And I mean, is it possible to say how many or what proportion of these feral children cases are real feral children who've been brought up by animals?
It's very difficult to say. Even the ones where there might be a kernel of truth become elaborated because everyone loves a tall tale, and you end up with these stories where the children eat raw meat and they can see in the dark and they can run up trees and things like this, and you think, well, that's physiologically not possible. Certainly your senses can attune and you're going to adapt to the circumstances and the environment in which you find yourself. For example, John was said to be covered in fur when they found him. Now, there is a condition called hypertrichosis where you can grow an excess of hair. Normally it's hormonal. Sometimes people with eating disorders can grow downy hair. But the likelihood is that people latched on to perhaps his hairiness, the length of his fingernails, his dirtiness, and it becomes a symbol of how animal-like he is. And it tells me as an anthropologist more about how different he was and how scary people found him, and how we're always trying to draw those lines between saying this is human and that is animal. And that's where these children suffer, because if you stop thinking of them as humans, then you start to treat them very differently, and invariably you treat them badly. These children were abused, neglected, and they still carry the scars of those experiences now.
That's really interesting stuff. Thank you so much for coming in to tell us about it.
Pleasure.
Feral Children begins on Monday at 9 p.m. on Animal Planet.